I want to address a fundamental challenge which you will face in your UPSC journey, inevitably to some degree at least. Why do most UPSC aspirants drop out? Why do they run out of steam? Why are they not able to sustain themselves even long enough to be in the race, let alone long enough for them to clear the prelims and the mains and the interview and so on? Why do they drop out? What is the fundamental cause of that happening, and how do you make sure that it doesn't happen to you? Let me tell you that most people, in fact, all people start with the same amount of enthusiasm. They start with the same intentions, they start with similar goals, and most of them are very serious about the goals. They drop out not because of lack of commitment, they drop out because of lack of strategy. Now, strategy, if you understand what it is a very intricate thing. It's a very cliched word. It has been used and abused uh, quite often, and it is now so common and so cliched that it is not clear what a strategy is. So I would very much like to set that record straight so that we know exactly what it is, and so we are on the same track. And so when we get around to making your strategy, which we'll be doing very soon, we know exactly where we stand and we know exactly what ingredients we have to insert in it. But first, let me tell you what is not a strategy. A book list is not a strategy. A playlist is not a strategy. A timetable is not a strategy. A self-study schedule is not a strategy. A study plan is not a strategy. These are all wish lists. They are lists of things you wish you would do. You wish, right? If you are able to do them, then they will lead you to a certain goal. They are based on a hypothesis. They are based on an assumption, which is most likely not going to get fulfilled because there are certain very important things about you yourself as a human being and the reality of life that you have not taken into account. You have just made a list of timetables which literally nobody follows, and which you are also not likely to follow because of certain reasons, which I will explain very soon. Bear with me. Be very careful in noting what I am going to tell you because they will form the basis of your strategy, and we are going to get to that in the very next step. So please keep your ears sharp and your eyes peeled. What is a good strategy? It consists of three fundamental ingredients. If you don't have those three ingredients, you do not have a strategy. One is it needs to consist of a series of very well-defined and scientific goals. I'll get into what those are and what types they should be, but it needs to be a very well-defined scientific series of goals. One. Two, accountability mechanisms. How are you making sure that you are going to stick to those goals? How are you going to make sure that your wish list of things that you wish you would do? I'll do this by this date, I'll do history by the 25th, and I'll be done with polity by the 27th, never works because you haven't taken into account what happens when procrastination hits, what happens when plans change, what happens when you don't feel like studying, what happens when things are not going into your head as much as they should be, what happens when something else comes into the picture and prevents you from working, from studying. You don't take those things into account, and therefore those plans are never followed. And since those plans are stacked on top of each other, right, you want to do history first and then polity, you miss one of them and the entire structure crumbles. And that is why those plans don't work, and that is why I want to make sure whatever you do now, the type of strategy we make for you now, takes into account all of these things, and they should never happen to you. So the third thing that is required is that your strategy should be based on your strengths and weaknesses. You are an individual person with a very different cognitive structure, a very different nervous system. You are unique in your abilities, right? In the way you learn, in the way you prefer to learn, in the speed at which you learn, and in the way which subjects are more attuned to your absorption than others. You might be good at the social sciences, but not so good at mathematics and the fundamental analytical subjects. Left brain people are good at that, but right brain people are not. So we need to know where is it that you lie so that we can have some form of customization for you, because that is going to form the basis of how well you do and how diligently you are able to track those goals which we are going to set for you. The ultimate strategy is what I'll be revealing to you now. This is something which has taken me 11 years or more to develop because I have been observing the examination very closely ever since I got interested in it. It's been a long time since I've been looking at this examination, the pattern of it, but more importantly, the people who end up clearing it and the people who don't. Now, I don't uh, necessarily believe that there is anything special about the people who clear this examination versus people who don't. But I think that there is a very strong correlation between the people who are able to clear it repetitively and predictably. I was able to do it 3 times in a row. There are many people who are able to do it. Why is that happening? Is there something going on which is not obvious? And I think that that something is effective strategy. Sounds cliched, but trust me, it is quite a lot more sophisticated than you might have thought. So what is the top 5 protocol? This ultimate strategy, the top 5 protocol has been gleaned from the strategies of multiple toppers, not just one. And they've been taken from discussions with multiple people, regardless of their rank, which I have been in touch with, I have interviewed, understood, tried to analyze and distill, right? On top of that, I have added a number of insights from the behavioral sciences, from cognitive science, neuroscience, goal setting theory, the psychology of motivation, the psychology of learning, and so on. And so this strategy is the guidelines for the strategy is going to inculcate and incorporate all of those. The first one is that you need to set micro goals. It sounds obvious enough, but I mean something very specific when I say set micro goals. What I mean is that those goals should be very specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. They are called SMART goals. Again, this is something which you may have come across, but in the context of the UPSC, what I mean is that these goals cannot be vague. You cannot say to me that I'm going to do NCRT history. You cannot say to me that I'm going to do polity. That makes no sense because it is too vague a goal. Your goal needs to be smaller, but it can't be too small, right? You can't say to me I'm going to read from page 17 to 19 of that book or so on, because that is a small goal and it's a very vague goal. Anybody can do that. What do you mean you'll read it? It needs to be a goal which is achievable, which is very specific, which is targetable, and which can be which pushes you in that zone of optimal challenge. If I say to you that I'm going to achieve and the entire Lakshmikant I'm going to finish in 2 months, right? That is a tall order, and that might be a realistic goal, but it is not easy to measure because it will consist of a lot of micro goals, right? So the type and the way you set your micro goals really matters. And this is coming directly from research in goal setting theory, which states that people only mostly are able to follow goals which are small, achievable, and put them in the right optimal level of challenge. It is very important to do that. And it is very important to understand it's a bit of an art and skill to take an unstructured goal and to break it up into these scientifically designed micro goals such that it all makes sense and that the doing and the overcoming of these micro goals adds up to something, right? It adds up to that progression of success, that progression of progress that we are looking for. In this case, it is a depth of knowledge. We want the depth of knowledge should increase. We want to keep qualifying from prelims to mains. And so we take certain precautions, we take certain things into account while doing so. We prioritize subjects which are going to be asked in prelims and mains both because they give us more return on investment, and we do a number of other things which I'll tell you about. But it already has been done for you in the strategizer of the Ultimate UPSC Navigator, which I'll be telling you about shortly. It divides the entire UPSC examination, including the prelims and mains, into 102 scientifically designed micro tasks. The way this thing is designed is that it makes sure that you can do each one of those 102 micro tasks in roughly the same amount of effort. So they are more or less equivalent. They will not only require roughly the same amount of effort, they will require roughly the same amount of time. So you have a objective, measurable now journey in front of you to traverse, but that's not even the half of it. There's a lot more to that. A roadmap is the second layer of strategy that you need to have. What do I mean by a roadmap and how is that different from the micro tasks which I just mentioned? A roadmap is basically one level up, right? It is a bigger picture of all your micro goals and how they're tied together with milestones included. Why are milestones an essential feature in this stage and why are they different from micro goals? Milestones are bigger goals. They are goals which, when achieved, deserve to be celebrated. And those victories add reinforcement, add encouragement, add positivity, and add confidence. So you need to know what are the measurable milestones. What should I call a milestone? Is doing an NCRT a milestone? Is clearing the prelims a milestone? What should be a well measured milestone so that it keeps me motivated all the while and I keep getting them as I go along? I keep encountering one or two and conquering them and keep going so that it keeps pushing me, it keeps propelling me. And so these milestones come equidistantly. Like you travel on a highway and you will notice that after every few miles, that is exactly what a milestone is. It will appear very predictably. So you need to know that you are on the right track. This allows you to stay on track and not to get lost, which is what happens most of the time. Again, this can be done with the UPSC strategizer. It will give you a list of dates of micro goals, which then convert into slightly larger mega goals, which we call milestones, which all combined take you to that ultimate stage of success that we are vying for. This is all part of the milestone tracker. It's one of the coolest features of the strategizer, which I haven't yet spoken about, but I will in the times to come. The third thing in the top 5 protocol is accountability mechanisms. Like I mentioned, you are in a race with your own self. Please remember that. The only competition you're facing in this examination is you and your own self, and you will have to hold yourself accountable. Nobody, no mentor, no teacher, no parent will do that for you, especially at this stage, and they shouldn't have to. The reason that you've taken this tough, difficult examination is a test of self-mastery. But that being said, this self-mastery does not need to be done by pure blunt willpower. It needs to be done with pure scientific analysis and logic. You are a machine. Treat yourself as a machine, suppose that you are, and make sure that machine covers the distance that it requires. And every few miles that that machine crosses in this UPSC journey, every few uh, pieces of information, of text, of work that you do needs to be accounted for so that you remain on track, so that one leads to the other. Now, how do you do this? This is a little bit tricky. This is what requires an insight into how the mind works. And one way to do that, a very effective way, which I do it consistently, I use this method in my own self to achieve my own goals, whatever they may be, is I use cognitive dissonance and guilt. You see, it is a very powerful motivator. Cognitive dissonance is something which happens in your mind when you are not at peace with yourself, right? If you lie or if you cheat and if you have a conscience, it will cause dissonance. It will cause a mental discomfort. This discomfort will become apparent in the way you speak. You will be nervous. You will avoid eye contact. You will feel guilt. We want to harness this guilt to make sure that you remain faithful to your goals and to your commitment, right? The strategizer will force you to commit dates and deadlines, right? It will force you to commit dates and deadlines. And research from the field of cognitive science, like I mentioned, confirms that merely having exposure to your goals and commitments increases the likelihood of compliance and discipline manifold. Just by people having awareness of what they have committed and a repeated exposure to those things, to their own commitments, leads to a statistical difference in the way they respond and their own discipline levels, right? So just knowing this, we're going to make full use of this insight to make sure that we remain on goal. There is always a possibility that you still do not remain on goal, but by doing all these, by stacking all of these insights one on top of the other, we are making sure that the probability that you remain faithful to your goals remains high all the time. The higher it is, the higher your chances of clearing the exam, the higher your chances of not burning out, the higher your chances of pushing through, the higher your chances of success. Because remember, it's a relative competition, it's a competitive competition. Most people who are not using any of these techniques are going to suffer a quality decline in their preparation, which you won't, hopefully, if you follow these principles properly. We will be using the psychology of habits. Another very powerful, naturally driven force, a mental force inside us, is to establish habits. When we follow habits, we do so effortlessly. The idea is to form the habits that you really want to form. And a really good habit for you as a UPSC aspirant to follow would be, for instance, to read the newspaper, which is, I think, a default. It goes without saying that most people have that habit or will develop that habit. It's fine, and it has its own merits. But a more useful habit would be to crush your goals, to crush your micro goals. You want every 4 or 5 days, every week or so to crush a goal. And without that, you will not find peace. And that habit will become so addictive, it will become so compelling that you will not be able to stop yourself. And again, as soon as a week passes, of that period of time elapses, you will start to feel dissonance inside you. You will start to feel something is not right because you haven't crushed any goals yet, because you haven't done what you set out to do, because your commitments and your goals and your deadlines are going to be right in front of you all the time. There will be no escape. And so habit formation will be enhanced, it will be enabled. And once it takes root, everything else becomes automatic. Then you do not require discipline because it will become, like I said, automatic. That is the power of using psychology and all these insights. So this is what it would look like. The strategizer will make you commit what the estimated date of completion is. And once you do complete it, it will force you to commit what the actual date of completion actually came out to be, right? So there is always a difference between how people uh, predict how much time they will take and how much time they actually take. Research shows that humans typically tend to overestimate their abilities and underestimate the time it will take to achieve a goal by about 20%. So this 20% of margin has been included in the strategizer, and I'll tell you about that later. The fourth important insight is that you need to be able to customize and adapt. So not only should the strategy that you make be solid enough, be good enough to include your own strengths and weaknesses, but when you go and you start to conquer these goals one by one, you will notice and learn quite a few things about yourself. You might think now that polity is going to be your strong suit or your weak area. And while learning polity, you might experience something entirely different. You might begin to enjoy it. If you begin to enjoy it, you will cover it faster, you will cover it deeper, you will enjoy it more. And by doing so, you will spend more time doing it by default. This might also mean that you spend less time on your weaker areas, say for instance, economics. And this thing could cost you heavily. So if you notice, and when you notice something like this is happening in your preparation, you need to be able to change your goals a little bit to make sure that your broad strategy remains the same, but you are able to take into account all these changes which you will inevitably experience in your own self, right? As you go through the long list of topics in the syllabus. The fifth guideline is quality control on learning. This you have had exposure to already. It is the hexatask method. It is based on principles from information processing theory. It consists of 6 tasks which you must perform before you can claim that you have actually done a subject. Those are big picture formation, first reading, second reading, analyzing previous year questions, revision and testing. Now, all of these mean specific things, and if you're not clear about what this is, you need to go back and revisit the last video and the last lesson. And you also need to take the hexatask qualification test to make sure that you understand. It's easy enough. Once it is understood, it will enable you to form the ultimate strategy for you, which is going to be the topic of our discussion when we meet next time. Like I mentioned, all of this is part of the ultimate UPSC navigator, strategizer. It's a very powerful tool which has been developed, and it has taken a very, very long time to develop, but it makes sure, and it includes all of these things that I've been telling you. It will make sure that none of this is missed, right? So you'll have a very solid base to form your foundations on. Apart from this, I have designed a UPSC strategizer qualification test, which is quite similar to the hexatask qualification test, just to make sure that you understand what a good strategy is, and so that you can have that dialogue with yourself going, so that introspection which will get initiated when you answer those questions, and you will then be able to identify the mistakes you're making, and probably also some insights about your own requirements which might have been completely missed, which only you know about. So I want that internal dialogue with you to begin before we dive into the next step, which is going to be the most critical step in this entire progression in this program, which you have been going through. So stay tuned for that. Be very honest and sincere when you answer questions in the UPSC Strategizer qualification test, because it will determine how effectively you are able to use it. So until next time.